It's never too late. That's the message. It's never too late. And there can be so much healing at the very last moment, the very last moments of life. That's so important to remember.
Remember how little you know. You're just a curious monkey after all.
Welcome back to Curious Monkeys. We have a very special episode today. When I started this channel, Dissolution, and this side project, Curious Monkeys, my idea was to explore, alter the state of consciousness, explore the consciousness beyond the ego, and see what we can bring back from there. So I was expecting to talk about psychedelics and dreams and meditation and yoga, spiritual practices, the afterlife, the nature of reality. But I never expected that I was going to have an episode on Alzheimer. And this is what it's all about. And this is a topic that touches me very deeply, because for the time where this podcast was recorded, I just came from a few months in Spain where I went to pass the time with my grandmother that has Alzheimer. So it was like a very challenging and profound time, but very rich. And I discovered a lot about this state of consciousness. So if you think about it, Alzheimer is a dissolution of identity. So it's like we all want to speak about, my ego got dissolved yesterday in my ayahuasca ceremony, but nobody wants to, or even in the meditation, or when you're in meditation, I completely transcend the thoughts. I was not caught in the mind. But when you talk about dissolution of the ego in a context like dementia or Alzheimer, it's a bit more scary. But it's actually altered the state of consciousness, and I think it's very related to the states of the dreams or the states of the bardo, this Buddhist concept of the state in between. So basically, if you think about what happens in a dream, you don't have a reference of the time. Sometimes it's very difficult to know what the people that you have in front, who they are, or who are you, or how do you get there. Things are confusing, change, but you still have emotions, you still have fear or smiles or laughter. So it's important that for us also to learn how to navigate, and how to navigate to be with the people when they are in these states. For me, it was like a bit of joining dots together, because it was very related to the work that we do in ceremony, when people is in ayahuasca and they don't know where they are, who they are, or why, or where they're. So the same practice, the same way to approach them applies here. So this episode is about this. I met the guest, Olivia. Is a fascinating woman that wrote a book that I read when I was with my grandmother. The book is called 10,000 Joys and 10,000 Sorrows, and basically is the first-person testimony of how she passed the process of Alzheimer when her husband Hob got it. The interesting thing is both of them were Buddhist practitioners, and they brought a lot of tools and things from their practice in how to deal with the disease. Ultimately, the idea is to make the disease your spiritual path, and when you have that intention and you have that frame of work, you can even enrich your life from a situation so complicated and delicate, like having some relative with Alzheimer. So I hope you are going to watch this. I know that this episode is not going to be viral because it touches a lot of topics that are very uncomfortable, like old age and death and blah blah blah. But I think it's useful, and you never know when somebody close to you is going to get in some of these states. So it's good to be prepared, and it's good to be informed. So if you have some relative and also you are watching this to help him, I really recommend you to get the book of Olivia. But now we're going to talk a bit more about that in the episode. So thank you, and see you very soon. Thank you so much for this conversation. And first of all, I really want to thank you for your book, the first book you wrote, 10,000 Joys and 10,000 Sorrows, that I got in a very precise time when my grandmother started to got Alzheimer, and I went to spend 2 months with her and my family in Spain, and that book really helped all my family, because sharing your journey and your tips and a lot of things that no one can prepare you to, there was there with me, and it was very important. So first of all, thank you for that.
Thank you. Yes.
And then I really want to have you here in this humble show, because I admire your courage, and I admire how you talk about topics that nobody really wants to talk about. These topics are things like a disease like Alzheimer or dementia, but more general, aging or death. These are taboos that I think are really important to talk about. So thank you for your work, and thank you for coming here.
Thank you. So it's
So I
heartening,
think-
to hear what people, how they might be touched by the book.
It's a very profound book. It's very, very personal, very emotional. So let's start by that. For the people that don't know about what this book is about, how can you put it in words? I know it's very big, but let's try.
Well, I've spoken about it a lot, and of course the subtitle tells you a lot about it, because that is a couple's journey through Alzheimer's. And it was the most challenging, certainly, chapter of our lives, but it was also an incredible experience of growth. And part of my healing from it was to write. And so I knew that, because of who my husband was, he was a Dharma teacher, a Buddhist teacher, and a psychologist, and also with a great knowledge of literature. So often when he couldn't find the words, when the dementia was quite far along, he would be able to tell me something with a couple of lines of poetry. It was incredible. And I knew that I must write something, and that his voice would be in this book. So I would say that the book was part of my healing. And I felt it was really important to, as you say, speak about those topics that a lot of people don't want to touch. And we have so much to learn about dementia. There's, and I can say more about that later, but because I had also experiences with my mother having Alzheimer's, and some very extraordinary moments in that proved that, and I'll make this point right up front, that there is consciousness beyond the brain. And the medical world does not ascribe to that. And maybe I'm jumping in too fast, too soon here, but I'll say that several times, because what it means is that no matter where somebody is in terms of the sort of dissolving of the brain, which is what's happening, you can always say the important things to them. And even if they don't respond or seem to be hearing, they are. And I think that's a very heartwarming thing to know. So I just want to say that right in the beginning, so I remember to say it, because I think they're often, with our loved ones, there's unfinished business or things that we haven't ever said to them. And it's never too late. That's the message. It's never too late. And there can be so much healing at the very last moment, very last moments of life. That's so important to remember. So maybe I should pause there and see if you want to
Yes.
ask anything
Yes.
more.
A lot of things. Let's go. For me, one of the things that got me into your book was kind of this paradox, the fact that you and Hob had a Buddhist training, and it's very easy to talk about the dissolution of the identity in meditation, and but I'm sure you will never expect to experience this dissolution of the identity. That is what is happening in this disease. And I'm wondering, what was the role of your practice on how you approach this situation differently through these practices that you had?
Yeah, because regular meditation, really daily meditation, was our way, both of us. And it was really amusing because at some point, his name was Harrison, but he was called Hob. He said to me, meditation is easier now because there aren't so many thoughts. And that, there's a sort of bitter irony to that, of course. But the fact that you have a steady practice, and the practice is about sitting and simply being with whatever is arising, whether it's some sensations in the body or it's mind, thoughts or feelings, you learn a kind of steadiness, hopefully, to sit with whatever arises. So then, when your partner or your parent or your grandparent has dementia and unexpected things happen, because they do, you have a kind of steadier base from which to respond to situations, and that is a great gift. So I would say it was those years of practice, but even if you're just beginning to have some kind of a meditation practice or some kind of a discipline that involves working with the mind and heart, it could be other things too. It could be Tai Chi or Qigong or Hatha Yoga or this kind of discipline too. If you have that, that is almost like the most important refuge that you have, what you can count on when you're faced with big challenges. And there were some very big challenges that came our way. I mean, I'll just mention one for my mother. She had a psychosis on top of dementia, and that was really harrowing. And her, sometimes doesn't happen all the time, but the behavioral centers of the brain are affected. And then, and it's important to understand this, a person may act out in the most appalling ways, and you can't believe that this person you've known is doing these things or saying these things. And yet, it's really important to understand that not to take that personally, because that's the disease speaking. It really isn't them speaking, or it's the disease acting out. It's not their acting out. And I think that's very important to remember. And in the case of my husband, Hob, he several times passed out in public places, and that created big scenes, with ambulances and emergency medical people and stuff. And the last place you want to take someone with dementia is to a hospital. It's just a nightmare for them because of all those stimuli, so I did everything I could to keep my husband out of the hospital, I can tell you. They need quiet environments. They need environments they can count on. I'm sure, Luis, you found that out with your grandmother when you were there.
Yeah, he has to be moved to the house of my father, and that was a new environment for her, and she was struggling a lot with that. During the day she was okay, but as soon the evening was coming, a kind of psychosis were creeping out that I need to go to my town, to my home, and it was very difficult to contain. And sometimes not violent, but sometimes it was very very difficult also for the caregivers, for the people to be in your center, because then if you are not in your center, it's almost like a toxic disease that is a feedback loop that she feels that you are also anxious, and so it's a challenge. Yeah, it's very very difficult. I can see that.
Yeah, I want to acknowledge that this must be one of the hardest illnesses to have. Because it affects the mind, and it emotionally, there can be deep anxiety and fear on the part of the person whose mind is going. It's understandable, and so this is really hard on the people around them. And
Exactly.
that's another whole topic which I've thought about a lot, which is caregiving, and how do you take care of yourself as a caregiver? You need to have people sometimes give you a break. You need to take care of your health. You need to realize how very wearing this is, because it's constant. And so, I'm fond of saying about the elder years that they're their most heroic years, which I really believe passionately, because it's a time of life when you haven't got the same energy and you may be dealing with some kind of illness, and then you have to face something even bigger, like a terminal diagnosis, or your partner has something, as cancer, or that's why I think it's an heroic stage. And I think people who are caregivers to those with dementia are even more heroic because they're unseen heroes and heroines. The world doesn't know what it's like.
Yeah, and this is suddenly it happens to you. Nobody prepares you for that. Nobody, you didn't expect it. You need to stop your life. You feel very isolated, guilty. It's everything, all the emotions there, and yeah, it's something that there is not a lot of training. That's why your book was so good at the end of each chapter, giving practical tips for the caregivers. How was this for you? How was emotionally for you? And can you give some tips to the people that maybe is passing through something similar?
Well, that's why I put those at the end of each chapter. I put reflections on the issues that had come up and suggestions about how to deal with them. And so off the top of my head, what can I say? You have to take care of yourself and get enough rest. And often that's hard because, as you were talking about your grandmother, it got more difficult with that called sundowning when it starts to get dark. And some people wander in the night and don't sleep. And we gave my husband melatonin every night to help, just to be sure that he didn't have sleeping problems. But if they do, then you get so worn down. So I think almost the most important thing for a caregiver is self-care, and trying to bring a support system around you. Hopefully there's family, or if there's friends or neighbors, because it's really quite a desperate situation. To be very honest, I felt very fortunate because I did have family around, and in the late stages, we were able to afford having some help. And after my husband had a major stroke, I couldn't do it anymore because I couldn't handle his body. So we had the visiting nurses and we had hospice, and they helped. They were incredible. And you need to know, actually, it's a good point right there, what your resources are, and to know that ahead of time. Where can you turn for help?
And what can you do? And sometimes maybe stop instead of trying to do too much. And this is something that is similar to my work here in the Amazon with the plants. Like sometimes you put a lot on you, you try to help too much, you drain yourself, and then instead of helping, you are actually not helping because your energy. This is what I felt with, and this is related to something you said at the beginning about they can hear, and even they don't understand. I will say even that they can feel. No, they can feel your happiness. They can feel if you are awkward, if you don't want to be there. They can feel if you want to be there. All these things I observed, and of course. For someone that is 24 hours with them, there is a lot of periods in the day that you don't want to be there, that you prefer to go to do your things. So sometimes it's better to go there and do it and come back in a centered state. For me, that's something that I really experienced with her. Like how I was, she was. Yeah.
I'm glad you asked about suggestions, because something that just popped into my head is that almost everybody can still be touched by music or by singing, by songs perhaps from your earlier years or even your childhood. So music and poetry and prayer, interestingly enough, if people have had any kind of religious background, those parts of the brain don't seem to be affected. And so in the case of both my mother and my husband, music was a very important way of soothing them, and not agitated, hard rock kind of music, but soothing music, quiet chanting, things like that can be really helpful. And Louise, you're so right. Sometimes you need to just stop and simply be. And also, how can I ever say enough about touch, about holding a hand or giving somebody a foot rub or a shoulder rub or or some kind of gentle massaging of the scalp. I mean, people are hungry for touch, I think, and it's often forgotten because we're sort of so tied up with trying to deal with the next demand or whatever that we forget, we just need to hold hands. Or, yeah. So I want to put that out as a very important part of one's, let's say, things to call upon for help.
Very, very simple, very important.
Yes, exactly.
What were your teachers, your masters, when you were going to them asking for advice or for what to do with hope? What were their advice or what they were saying about this process?
That's such an interesting question because the most helpful thing that I did was I took a course in what was called habilitation therapy. It was under the auspices of the Alzheimer's Foundation, Association in the Boston area. And it was taught by somebody who had a lot of experience with Alzheimer's, and it was really helpful, very practical. For instance, I would never have known about the visual confusions that somebody with dementia can have. So that, for example, a shadow on the floor, they see that as an abyss, as something they might fall into. And it's like, what? You would never think of that unless somebody told you that. And so that was really, really helpful for me. And then the other teachers, my Dharma teachers, I found just at that time my root teacher in the Tibetan tradition. And at one point, and this is an important story because my husband and I, we had talked about death and dying. And in fact, he had taught that course at Lesley University in our community. And we were very familiar with it. We'd both done hospice work. And I have to say, our work with the plants was a real blessing because we had had experiences of letting go of the body identity, of letting go into the sort of mystery of the sacred medicines. And I can't tell you how grateful I am that I had that because it helped to, I don't want to say completely take away because I think the fear of death is very primal, but it sure softened it a lot. I was present for a number of deaths and I saw that it was a liberation. It was oh my God, you're becoming free of this body that's causing so much trouble. And that's a cause, I mean, there's grief, terrible grief, but it's a cause of rejoicing for that person. And, it sounds like such an astonishing thing to say, but it's really what my sister and I experienced when our mother died. She'd been so deeply suffering, and her face changed. Her face became peaceful, and it was a really precious moment, I have to say. Now, in telling you this,
What plant? What was this with psilocybin or with which plants? With plant?
psilocybin and LSD too. Yeah.
Wow.
Those were the two things that primarily that I had experimented with. So I was very grateful to them. I felt they were great teachers.
Amazing.
Really great teachers, And so that was a blessing. Now, you asked me a question, but I've sort of lost track.
You were talking about your Dharma teachers.
Because there was an important story there. it's probably not surprising that I lost that thread, because Hob and I talked about death, and he said to me, I do not want to live into the late stages of this illness. I saw your mother go through that, and I do not choose that. And he said, I really want to, and he used the term get off the bus. That was his term for dying. He said, I really want to get off the bus before that. So we talked about that, and how would you do that? And he said, well, I'd probably stop eating. And that's what actually my father did, and my grandmother and my great-grandmother. There was a tradition in our family that most of those people got into their 90s. They were very blessed, but things got hard with the body, and they made that choice. And it takes a lot of courage, a lot of courage. But my father had cancer, but he didn't talk about it, and he wasn't in pain. So actually, when he stopped eating, it only took a few weeks for a very peaceful death. But again, I've digressed a little bit, because this is supposed to be about my Dharma teacher.
It's very good, no worries. Very good.
I was very concerned about what would my role be if he wanted to do this. And I took that question to Domo Geshe Rinpoche, who was my root teacher. And I said to him, I'm really apprehensive, because I don't know what my role should be. And he only said one very simple thing. He didn't speak much English, so it was sort of kind of through the person who was sort of translating his English for me. And all he said to me was, everyone has their own karma. Everyone has their own destiny. And maybe it was because of who he was, because he was a very highly attained, he was a very hidden teacher, but he was someone that the Dalai Lama went to visit. So it tells you, he was really quite extraordinary. But what I got from that was, I needed to trust that whatever circumstances unfolded, there was Hob's destiny involved. It wasn't just all my responsibility. And for some reason, that just took the weight off me. And I can't explain to you rationally why that was so. It was just something about his state, his quiet assurance, his deep inner conviction that was a gift to me. So
some trust. It's trust, no? Kind of trusting in whatever will unfold. That's what it is, yeah? Instead of fearing it, is trusting. Amazing.
Very, very interesting, very thought-provoking to me. But I'll tell you one other story, because I was in a Vipassana retreat, and I went for the interview, and I spoke about my anger. I said, I'm not by nature an angry person. I was never angry at Hob. I never lost my temper, because I knew that it was the illness. It wasn't him. He wasn't an angry person either. But it was my frustration, and it was my exhaustion. And so the teacher just said to me so sweetly, she said, Olivia, do you know your refuges? Well, of course, because I'm in that tradition, I knew about the three jewels, taking refuge in the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha. But no, I would forget. And I would forget, where should I turn when I'm in distress? Sometimes I didn't remember. And her asking me that question led to my really contemplating a lot. What does it mean to have a refuge? And I would say to anybody, who's listening to our conversation, that knowing what your refuges are, what do you turn to, or who do you turn to, are really, really critical questions. You really need to know that. And so I was forever grateful to this Dharma teacher for that exchange. It was so simple, but it was so important.
And what were some of these refuges, if you want to share some places you visit, some friends?
It's a good question. Well, my refuges were for sure my practice. And whenever I did my practice, I would start with the three refuges. But sometimes you do these things automatically and you don't really, besides, it's rather abstract. But I think the deepest understanding is when you take refuge in the Buddha, you're really taking refuge in your deepest, your true self, your deepest nature. And so if you can remember that, that's what you're always nourishing through meditation, is that natural mind or natural heart. Because, I love in the Eastern traditions, they don't separate mind and heart the way we do. So it's and also, I think the body, this is maybe a surprising thing to say. No, it's not. Because I think when we're distressed, we forget that we're in a body. And it's often a few moments of some slow, long, deep breaths, diaphragmatic breaths, or maybe a couple of maybe just a short walk. 10 minutes of walking will completely change your state. I mean, that was a refuge for me, for sure, was going out and having a walk. And or it could be just 3 or 4 yoga postures or a few moments of Tai Chi or something. Those are refuges, they're beautiful refuges. So we forget the body.
Yeah, it's very interesting, this mechanism that we have in our brain, that is more when we are more stressed and we need it the most is when we do these things the less. It's kind of, no, I don't have time for that now. This is so important. It's incredible.
So true. Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Yes.
Thank you for sharing. So you mentioned consciousness before and what dementia that taught you about consciousness. So share how this, what did you learn? What did you learn about the mind, about consciousness? These are big words, but
big words. Yeah. Well, I would say probably the most beautiful thing I learned. I forgot it at times. No, I remembered it every day, but when I looked back and I was writing in retrospect after Hob had died, I realized that it had really been a process of deepening in love, that love is really what we're called to. It's why we're here, I think, is to really discover how to receive love and to give it. And that doesn't necessarily mean romantic primary relationship, although of course it often takes that form, but just simply seeing the goodness in people and loving people beyond their sort of sometimes outward behaviors and appearances of things. But that's not, I'm coming to love before I'm answering the question about consciousness, because consciousness, love is part of consciousness, being aware of loving, being aware of, is what I'm going to say, is it kind or is it not? It's becoming more conscious. And, from my book, Aging with Wisdom, I'm really, one of the theses of that book is it's an invitation to accept our aging with consciousness, to age consciously. And that means to me that we really, from moment to moment, want to be aware what's going on and how are we responding to it. That's what our life is all about. It's not how are we reacting necessarily, which is usually a fast, quick thing, but what is a thoughtful response? So I think this consciousness, such a big question. I think the point I made earlier about that there is consciousness beyond the brain is such an important one. And in the case of my husband, because he was a Dharma practitioner for so many years, that was a great advantage. You can hear that I'm putting in quite a strong recommendation for having some way that you work with the mind and heart.
Yeah,
I
of
just
course.
don't see how people get through life without it.
Yeah, me neither. And I have.
So I don't know that I've answered your question, Luis, very well. It's so big, but I think it's about also very simple moments of what is our awareness from moment to moment. And you know that from the retreats that you've done, that's what you're training in. And so that's where the caregiving is really an extraordinary opportunity. It's also just such hard work. But let me tell you a little story that I didn't at the
Please.
beginning, because my first response when I found out that Hob was being tentatively diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I want to say too that term is used way too much, way too much. And he said only several months before he died, because he did die in the late middle stages, I think because of his intention. That's another story. But sometimes I hit a place here where I forget where I'm going because there's a place of such deep feeling about it. Oh, I know what it was. Yeah, it was that my first response was, I need to go to what we call them spiritual friends, or Kalyana Mitras. And I was really fortunate to have somebody named Tulku Tondup to be that. He lived in my neighborhood. He was the first person that I went to see when I was looking for an enlightened teacher. And he wasn't to become my primary teacher, but I went to him and I explained that we were dealing with this challenge and I would really welcome his perspectives on it. And he said the most beautiful thing to me. First of all, he said, meditation is a preparation for dying. That was an arresting statement. And the second thing, he said many things to me that day, but he also said, this is, and this will become your practice. He said, you will understand that the smallest things are part of your practice. He said, even giving him a spoonful of food, if you think about it, it's an act of generosity. It's an act of kindness. It's an act of metta, or loving kindness. It's all of those things, something so simple. And that he brought it down to one very small example like that was very helpful, because I would remember that. Of course, I forgot it a lot. I mean, I don't want to sound like some sort of an Olympian caregiver here, because
No.
I wasn't, but I would remember it from time to time.
But that's really important, to being able to shift that perspective of being the victim, and to say, no, this is my practice now, and how that intention will change and unfold, and will give you a lot of gifts, like any practice. Yeah, if you take it as a practice. And see, tell me what were some of these gifts that you got from this practice.
Well, certainly the gift of patience. I think the greatest gift of all was accepting whatever happened. And that included things as dramatic as his passing out in public places. Or, I mean, that's so big. Can you accept something that happens suddenly that's shocking? And I would be sort of astonished that in these places of crisis, a kind of deep calm would come. I'd be very calm. And I knew that was the fruit of practice. I just knew it. So I have to say that was a gift. And there was also the gift of laughter, because sometimes things were very funny, even if they were not so funny.
Yeah. Me too. I loved so much with my grandmother. Really, I had so precious moments with her. Not even when she was well. We have like this kind of humor and what you were saying before, touching and hugging. Before we were not doing that so much, but now and we had these gifts as well. Like humor is very important in all of this. Yeah, and
It really is.
Hope was very funny. I remember in the book a lot of one line. Yeah.
Yeah, he was very funny, sometimes absolutely outrageous. And yes, humor. I think we should really put that up very near the top of the list of having a kind of lightness towards even the heavy things that happen. And I really don't want to sound like someone who went through this with flying colors, because there's so many. I really want to say this so many times when you really are so discouraged, so broken down, so just tears, just exhaustion. I want to not underplay the shadow of it,
Yeah,
because the
of course.
shadow is huge.
Of
Yeah.
course. Of course. That's very important. That's very important, and that was my first reality check when I went to my grandmother. No, I'm going to help, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to just. And then I realized that this thing is really serious, and it has a big shadow on it.
And also that sometimes to affirm their fear or their sadness and to be able to weep with them. Neither of us were very good criers, so I can't say we did that, but I can imagine for some people that might be very, very important to accept the roller coaster of emotions, whether you're going through them or your loved one is.
Touching a bit more lastly in the esoteric part, like there is this sorry if I'm not very accurate, because I don't have any training in Buddhist. It's just what I read here and there, but like I'm very attracted to the concept of the bardo, as this moment, this process where you are not there and you are not here. And sometimes I felt like my grandmother, we was in a kind of mental bardo. Yeah, it's like remembering things from the past, old pattern, all habits coming in, like it's almost like the process of death, instead of being short, is spread out through months, years, and it's very mystical in a way as well to be with a person that is in that state. It kind of puts you in a different state as well. That was at least what I was experiencing it. Did you have some comments on this, or?
Yes, I'm so glad you brought this up, and also that you expressed it so well, talking about the bardo or the in-between state. Yes, this is very common that people drift off into some other realm, and they may be speaking about that, or maybe your grandmother was going, as you said, way back into her past, and that yes, that happens. I'll give you an example from my mother that just blew me away, because she was a writer and a poet, and read in philosophy, and was part of a group that talked that some very extraordinary people came to, like Alan Watts and Krishnamurti, and
Wow.
so she was philosophically oriented, and she meditated. She got initiated into TM, transcendental meditation, and we used to meditate together. So I'd give that as background. So we were sitting. This is a time when she hardly spoke anymore, just a few words here and there. And she was sitting in her wheelchair, and I could see she wanted to say something. It was a very hard time. And she got quiet, and I could just feel her trying to say something. And all of a sudden, she said, God, physics, and the cosmos. It's like, what? It's like, what? That surely was coming out of some kind of bardo state that she
Wow.
was in. Yeah, that was really dramatic to me. It's like, don't ever estimate what kind of inner work of the heart.
Exactly. Don't underestimate what they are. You don't know. It's like maybe they are tapping is like a very psychedelic state in a way as well. It's similar to what happened in the plant. You are very vulnerable. Demons appear, also very joyful moments. That's why, for me, it was interesting to compare it with the work in ceremony. Like it's short, but it's also a kind of this bardo state where like you cannot access them through the rational mind, but they feel you. They feel your breathing. They feel if you are anxious. So it was very nice, very good practice for me as well. I took it as a practice, and with your book and with your advice, and I learned about my job. My job gave me tools to work with her. It was really a lot of gifts also brought to me. This is so. It's also and also it's like just a good approach to have it, because it's constructive, no? It's like don't get into despair, because it's, as you were saying, like it's a very dramatic process, and it's how you approach it, like everything.
And it's so mysterious. We don't know what realms that person is in. And I think it's helping them to let go of the body. And so it may be disorienting to the average person, like what is going on here? But I think to even trust those impressionistic states is really important. And the problem with the medical model is that we'll tend to discredit it, say, well, that's kind of madness, or that's because they've lost their mind or something. And no, I think there's something much deeper happening. Yeah. Oh, you really said it well, Luis. You did.
well, thanks to your book. How and once Hope passed away, how did you deal with the loss? And how was that process?
Well, that's a deep question. I would say one of the first things that was really important that I had been introduced to was how important it is to take care of the body of your loved one in death. And that's a very radical idea, because we've given over everything to the funeral business. But I didn't do that, because I had read a very important article, which I can refer you to. It was by Mary Catherine Bateson. It's on the internet, and it's called 6 Days of Dying. And it's about, her father was Gregory Bateson, who was a famous philosopher. And they went to the Green Gulch Zen Center in California for his dying. And so he would be in a safe place. And she describes the 3 days leading up to his death and the 3 days following it. And so when Hob died, my son came over, and we had a hospice person at that time, and the three of us washed his body, and we put on his ordination jacket, we took, we made the place beautiful, and I'd set it up so, this is very unusual, they wouldn't move his body for, it was November, so it turned out to be 3 days. And many people came to sit with him because he'd been a teacher. And even if it's a short time, it's really important. These are things that are in that article. So I would just refer your listeners to that. But it helped so much to take care in that very hands-on way. Now, to answer your question, I wasn't a very good griever. I'd been so trained by the experience, which was the last couple of years were the hard ones. It was 6 years altogether, and the last two were the hard ones. And so I was exhausted, and friends asked me, they wrote me the day that I told them, which was the day of his death. They said, "You've been through so much." They said, "Why don't you come to visit us?" Well, they lived in Hawaii. Well, I did. And that helped. I went, in other words, well, let me also say that we had a big age difference. So I was much younger. He was 76 and I was 62. Is that right? 14 years. And so I was in a much easier stage of life in terms of my health. But I was writing, and the writing was enormously helpful to me. I mean, much of it I didn't use, but it was sort of pouring myself onto the page. And and doing a lot of walking, a lot of being in nature. I think that's very important when we're grieving, to be in nature and to walk and to shed tears if that's where you are, or even to make sound. I sometimes, during his illness, when I got so exhausted and frustrated, I think I wrote this in the book, I got in a car when I could leave him and I drove off and I just roared. I just had to roar. And, it sounds crazy, but it wasn't. It was so
Cathartic.
it was relieving to let out all that steam that so I didn't want to do that to him. And anyway, I'm digressing again, but I think grieving is a very complex process, and it's up and down. And I wrote something, I think it's in the Aging with Wisdom book. I have to go look it up, but I won't. But it was a piece that I wrote called Bleached Bone. Yeah, it's a little chapter in that book. And I would go back and read that. This was years later, and I would weep, which is to tell you that in some ways, a big loss like your partner, it's a timeless thing. You don't know when you're going to be touched again. And I think it took about 2 years. I didn't know until the 2 years were over, when something shifted and I realized that I'd come through some stage, which is very hard to describe until you've been in it. It's just very hard. I mean, I was working, I was, functioning fine, but there was some part of me that was coming to terms with this loss. So you have to have a lot of kindness towards yourself in dealing with that. It's a big topic.
Big topic, yeah. But it's a good because it's interesting that you kept the body with you, and these practices that some people that maybe are listening like, oh, how they can do that. But this relates to this next topic, and maybe the next book you wrote that I haven't read, but maybe we can explore it now for a while, Aging with Wisdom. And that we live in this age-phobic, or even more than age-phobic, death-phobic society. We don't want to hear anything about death. It's like it doesn't exist. Even people is dying in the bed in the hospital, and you don't talk with them about death. It's kind of the big shadow of our society. And practices like, for example, having a body in your home that is a natural practice, that is necessary for the grieving and for the are seen as something even morbid, or we just want to get rid of the thing, give it to the company and tell me a bit about this phenomenon of the age phobia or death phobia, and how your book Aging with Wisdom responds to this, or in a conscious way, or what is your perspective?
Well, it's a subject I feel very passionately about, as you can tell, because it's really a pathological aspect of our culture that it is age phobic, and it's age phobic because it's death phobic. That fear of death is at the bottom, really, of ageism, and it's really serious. I mean, there's many more books being written about this, and things are shifting, but they've got a long way to go. And there's been a very positive response to that book. And I do a course, which is an 8-week course that I do through the Cambridge Center, Insight Meditation Center, and it's called Aging, Awareness, and Awakening. And I'll be starting the 7th round of it this fall. And, many people sign up for it because I think that for people who are trying to live age consciously, they really want to be and talk with other people to find out how they're dealing with these challenges. And so they're seeking connection and community, And I think we need to be seeking that anyway, given what's going on with our planet. We must come together. So people want, the people that are drawn to this, and many of them, of course, have a meditation practice, they really want to talk with other people about what's on their mind and heart. And so what happened for me was that when I wrote the book, 10,000 Joys and 10,000 Sorrows, I was asked to give a lot of talks, and it kept me thinking, I would have anyway, but about this topic and how to address it. And I began writing, and that became the second book. And I felt very drawn to write short pieces. In other words, the chapters are only sometimes 2 or 3 page, 4 pages long, so that you could pick it up and put it down, and it would be an easy read. And yet my whole purpose was to give people a sense of possibility and inspiration and things to think about, or even let it become, a topic for a book group or something like that. So again, writing was my way of finding my way through this experience, because I'm very much in the elder years, and you're inevitably faced with challenges. So I was trying to live consciously. I was trying to age consciously.
And what does it mean? And what is that? How do you age consciously?
Well, it's back to what I said before about moment to moment awareness. How are we really present to our lives? And it's how we respond to what life presents to us. And that includes the hardest stuff. So aging consciously, it means, for instance, you get a hard medical diagnosis. So every step of the way, your appointments with doctors, you're sorting through the information, you're dealing with the symptoms, you're accepting this is I say this is in the natural order of things. That's a favorite expression of mine. This is in the natural order of things. It's natural for the body to grow old, isn't it? Yes, it's natural for it to have illnesses, and it helps with acceptance. And I think that accepting things as they are, must be one of the most important practices you can have, or outlooks that you can have. And that, to me, is conscious aging. Yeah, I don't know if that helps or...
It helps a lot. It helps a lot. Yes, very powerful. And this is about as well this quote that you like, and a very powerful concept of your first book, The Grace of Diminishment. Can you just round it up, explaining where this comes from and what is the grace of diminishment?
I have to say, there is no other phrase that I've thought more about than that one. And it came to me, I think, as many things come to us in a surprising way. It came in a letter that was written to a friend of mine who was living with cancer, and she read it to our little meditation group. And it was a quote from the mystic. He was a priest, a Teilhard de Chardin. He was a French priest and mystic and a philosopher, writer. He was also an anthropologist, a very interesting man. And he was so ahead of his time that some of the things that he wrote, the Vatican didn't approve of, and a lot of them, I think, have come out since he died. But he wrote this to my friend, and this is a paraphrase of his words, but he said, "In my younger years, I thanked God for my expanding, growing life. But now in my later years, when I find my physical powers growing less, I thank God also for what I call the grace of diminishment." I was in my early 40s when I heard that, and I something said, that's really important. this is probably my nature to gather little bits of wisdom, but I I went home and started a file then, which I called Aging and Wisdom. It's so amazing to me when I look back on it, because that was 45 years ago or something. And uh, because I had remarkable grandmothers in particular, especially one of them, they were role models for how to stay engaged and dynamic as long as your health allowed it, right up into the very last months of your life. And that was inspiring to me. I mean,
Yes, and also roles models of people that are able to die well, yeah, instead of dying in this trauma state. I would, what happened with my life? I regret this. Like they think about this before, they prepare for this, so they also can live with grace and is not causing a trauma in the family, the testament that they live is one of, okay, it's okay, look at the grandma, it's like he depart and he was good, so it's not the demon that this society tried to present to us. But I think it's very related to our ego, to our materialistic way of living, and to the trap that we are, but slowly by slowly.
I mean, we're both a materialistic and a very secular culture, very suspicious of the invisible and the mysterious. And that's so sad. That's so sad. And, here you are living, I would assume, close to indigenous peoples and close to nature. And these mysteries are much more present there. Yeah.
Exactly.
And you're so right, because one of the things that I've talked about in the course is about our legacy as elders. And it's not about whether you've written something or it's how you've lived it. That's what really matters. And how you've lived those late years is what becomes an inspiration to younger people. Yeah, I think that's really important to remember, because, everybody isn't a writer, everybody isn't a musician, or whatever, but how people live, that can be the gift.
It is a gift. It is a gift. So to wrap up, what are you about? What are you working about these days, or how people can find you? What are your next retreats, or what are your projects?
Well, I have a website which is under my name, Olivia Hoblitzelle, which is a hard one to spell, HOBLITZELLE. So I have a website, and also, Luis, I can put, when you've done this podcast, I can put it on my website. And I'm not saying the whole world goes to my website, but some people do, and it would be a way of people finding out about curious monkeys.
Thank you so much. Yes.
But so I teach a course starting in the middle of October through Cambridge Insight Meditation Center, and I'm writing again. I'm writing. It's very early, but kind of highlights from my spiritual journey, because it's been quite remarkable at several points. I've been very blessed, and I think there's some people who are very interested. I'm one of them in this kind of story. I love to hear how people who are seekers have found their way. So we'll see what comes forth, but that's what I'm doing right now. So I'm teaching and writing, and feel very blessed with both of them.
Yes, yeah, I will get your second book. I'm sure it will be really good. And thank you so much. This conversation was amazing. I knew it was going to be amazing, but better than I expected. And I think people should pay attention to this. It's difficult. It's uncomfortable at the beginning, but all these topics are just gifts. And as soon you start to think about these things, the better. Because, of course.
I want to say to your listeners what a great contribution you're making by having conversations like this. It's really wonderful to be able to meet in this way. I mean, here we are, you were in different continents, and hopefully reaching people on yet other continents. It's amazing, our times. So I just want to thank you for what you're doing.
Okay, thank you. I take it. Thank you so much. Thank you, Olivia. I hope we will have another one of these ones soon. And yes, thank you. Thank you for your time. Yeah.
Thank you, Luis. I've really enjoyed being with you. Okay.
Good.
Finito.